Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, unwanted pets and relatives, greetings and hello. It is I, your favorite obscure social studies teacher, with just enough expertise to make things interesting, Mr. Palumbo, and this is the one and only Professor Liberty Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, folks. You know I always appreciate it. I always am trying to do better episode by episode for the tens and tens of people that listen to the podcast. And so today will be no different. It will be 100% effort, research, ideas, a little bit of wit, or like the kids say, it's going to be straight fire, FR, no cap. If you'd like to email the show, the email is professorliberty1776@gmail.com. That's professorliberty1776@gmail.com. Actually, I don't know the next important battle that we should discuss. I've got some ideas. Obviously, Thermopylae is a good choice. The battle at Trafalgar I've been thinking about with Lord Nelson, that'd be a good one. But if you have a battle that you would like me to discuss, now I have to say, I only have enough expertise to make things interesting. So if you go super obscure and it's some kind of battle in, Mongolia in the 12th century, I'm probably not going to know that one. But today, here we are, and we're going to continue our series as promised, Important Battles. And today we are going to discuss the Battle of Midway, which is a World War II battle. And I know I'm being very United States centric because we did a battle at Shiloh. Now we're doing the Battle of Midway. This is probably where I'm going to camp, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're probably going to be doing a lot of U.S. history. But like I said earlier, we will branch out into some world history, historical battles for sure. The Battle of Midway was fought between June 3rd and June 6th, 1942, and it stands as one of the most pivotal battles in World War II. Now, it's often overshadowed by more popular battles like maybe Stalingrad or D-Day, but Midway's strategic significance was immense. It was marked by a decisive shift in the balance of power in the Pacific. It halted Japanese expansion in its tracks, and it propelled the United States on the path towards eventual victory. In the early months of the war in the Pacific, the tide had seemed to be turning in Japan's favor. They seemed unstoppable. Their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet. It sank or damaged multiple battleships, and it rendered the remaining fleet vulnerable. This initial success, followed by a string of other victories across the Pacific, Japan's forces seized Guam, Wake Island, and the Philippines, pushing American forces back and demonstrating their apparent naval superiority. And I'm sure they were bolstered by these string of successes. They set their sights on Midway Island. The island of Midway had a strategic significance. It would extend the Japanese. They wanted to make what scholars and historians call a defensive perimeter. So if you have a textbook, a U.S. history textbook, or a world, even in the world history, they often show the Pacific when you're talking about the war in the Pacific, and they'll show this bold yellow line, right? And this bold yellow line was the defensive fence, if you will, a wall that Japan was trying to create to defend itself from any U.S. incursion. If the Japanese would have captured Midway, they would have extended this defensive perimeter. They would have further threatened Hawaii, and they thought that the U.S. would negotiate for peace. This is what they thought. However, through a brilliant feat of code breaking, American cryptographers were able to decipher an encrypted Japanese message revealing the details of the upcoming attack, being that of Midway, and the date of the attack. This incredible intelligence coup landed on the desk of Admiral Chester Nimitz. Nimitz was a thoughtful and deliberate leader who had risen through the ranks of the U.S. Navy. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1905, and he had a calm demeanor and a very strategic mind that was recognized during World War I. And by 1941, he found himself thrust into the role of Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet after the devastating attack at Pearl Harbor. Despite the devastating loss at Pearl Harbor, Nimitz remained undeterred. He understood the importance of the Pacific theater and the crucial role that the U.S. Navy would play in defeating Japan. When presented with the decoded message, Nimitz recognized this as a potential turning point in the war. However, he also understood the limitations of his own forces. The Pacific Fleet was still reeling from Pearl Harbor, and American carrier strength was significantly less than that of Japan. Nimitz's strategic genius lay in his ability to make the most of the intelligence at his disposal. He knew that a direct confrontation with the entire Japanese fleet was out of the question. The Japanese possessed a larger carrier force, as we just mentioned. And in a straight-up fight, the U.S. Navy would likely be defeated. Instead, Nimitz devised a daring plan to lure the Japanese carrier within range of his own carriers and ambush them. So let's break down the plan, Nimitz's plan for Midway. It has three main parts: positioning, intelligence, and surprise. Regarding positioning, Nimitz meticulously placed his three carriers, the Enterprise, the Hornet, and the Yorktown, in a strategic location midway between Hawaii and the expected path of the Japanese fleet. This position offered several advantages. First, it allowed the American carriers to remain undetected by Japanese reconnaissance. Second, it placed his carriers closer to Midway Island, enabling their land-based bombers to join the attack. And finally, it kept the U.S. carriers within range of their own fighter aircraft for protection. Intelligence. The U.S. codebreakers were able to determine not only the fact that the Japanese were planning the attack, but the specific date and time of the attack. This crucial information allowed Nimitz to position his carriers in a path of the ongoing Japanese fleet and launch a preemptive strike, which leads us to surprise. The element of surprise was paramount to Nimitz's plan. The Japanese, anticipating an American defense centered around Midway Island, were completely caught off guard when they saw American carrier forces directly in their path. So just before dawn on June 4th, over 100 carrier aircraft launched an attack on Midway Island. Their primary targets were airfields, hangars, and fuel storage facilities. The attack caused significant damage, destroying buildings, machinery, and several Marine Corps fighter planes caught off guard. However, by a stroke of luck, the crucial American storage tanks buried into the coral beneath the airfield remain unharmed. This would prove to be a crucial factor in the coming battle, as it allowed American aircraft to continue launching a counterattack throughout the day. The crucial moment in the battle for U.S. forces occurred around noon, when American scout planes, after hours of searching the vast expanse of ocean, finally located the Japanese carriers. Despite facing overwhelming odds, 3 separate waves of American dive bombers launched a coordinated attack. The first wave consisted of torpedo bombers lumbering in at low altitude. They were met by a fierce wall of anti-aircraft fire and were decimated by the Japanese Zero fighters. The first wave failed to score any hits, but their sacrifice bought valuable time for the following waves. The second wave, consisting of arrived just as Japanese carriers were recovering aircraft and refueling on deck. This presented a perfect opportunity for American forces. Utilizing a devastating near-vertical dive bombing technique, American dive bombers managed to pierce the heavy armored deck of 2 Japanese carriers. Both these carriers ignited into massive flames. Within minutes, all 4 Japanese carriers were engulfed in flames. The fires raged out of control. They were fueled by bombs, torpedoes, aviation fuel that had been carelessly left spread out on the deck during the frantic preparation to launch a counterattack. The inferno was further intensified by the detonation of the ammunition magazines. This racked the ship with thunderous explosions. Dense smoke bellowed into the sky, blotting out the sun and making conditions on the aircraft carrier nightmarish, to say the least. The sole remaining or surviving Japanese carrier, the Hairu, refused to go down without a fight. The captain of the Japanese carrier determined to inflict as much damage as possible before succumbing to its own battle damage. The carrier launched 2 daring attacks against the Americans. The first wave, launched just before noon, managed to find the American carriers sort of by luck. They targeted the carrier Yorktown, and although they inflicted further damage, they were intercepted by American fighters and failed to score any knockout blows. With a raging fire and internal damage and internal flooding, the USS Yorktown was eventually abandoned by the crew. All attempts to salvage and save the ship failed, and on the morning of June 7, it rolled over and sank. The impact of Midway was far-reaching. In the textbook and the way we teach it in class, it's certainly taught as the turning point in the war in the Pacific. Japan had not only lost irreplaceable ships, remember, they lost 4 carriers. That is a decisive blow, especially to a country who does not have the industrial base like the United States. To lose 4 aircraft carriers in one battle is devastating. But on top of that, Japan would lose the pilots, the skill, the veteran troops that early spearheaded those early victories. They lose all of that in one battle. This left a gaping hole in Japan's naval aviation and naval striking ability. And Japan would struggle to rebuild its carrier fleet and train new pilots for the remainder of the war. This lack of offensive capability forced them to abandon any further expansionary goals. So in other words, they're playing defense for the rest of the war. And conversely, the U.S., now emboldened by this victory, could now begin planning counteroffensive, ultimately leading to the liberation of occupied territories that Japan took over. So let's talk about that a little bit. Midway, we just talked about the strategic significance, right? Well, Midway also had a psychological impact. This myth of Japanese invincibility, cultivated through the early years, all these rapid conquests, all these islands that fell, right? American civilians and troops who had been left reeling after Pearl Harbor were lifted up by the news of Midway. It demonstrated that the U.S. Navy could not only withstand a surprise attack, but it could also decisively defeat this unstoppable Japanese juggernaut. The Battle of Midway serves as a testament to the importance of several key factors in warfare. First, the ability to gather and analyze intelligence has shown to be crucial. American codebreakers, through meticulous work, were able to crack the Japanese communication codes, proving invaluable information about the upcoming attack. This intelligence allows U.S. commanders to anticipate the Japanese moves and deploy forces accordingly. and also to achieve a decisive surprise attack, which if you guys haven't noticed when you study Japanese warfare, that is their favorite form of fighting, right? The surprise attack. Second, the battle underscores the significance of strategic planning. Admiral Nimitz, armed with the knowledge of the impending attack and location and date, skillfully positioned his limited carrier force in a way that it would inflict maximum damage. Third, Midway highlights the role of technological innovation, and this is something we always talk about in class. The development of the dive bombers, with their ability to deliver near vertical attacks that could pierce heavily armored decks of carriers, proved devastating to the Japanese fleet. Also, things like American radar technology also played a crucial role. But what we always mention in class is that Midway brought to the forefront the significant impact of the aircraft carrier. And this is in regards to naval power. Before Midway, battleships ruled the waves. Countries thought the more battleships I have, the more powerful I am. Battleships have heavy guns that could unleash devastating firepower at long ranges. However, at Midway, it was the aircraft carrier. It was aircraft launched from aircraft carriers that sank all 4 Japanese carriers. This decisive victory proved that battleships, though still powerful, were no longer the ultimate naval weapon. From here on out, the aircraft carrier showed its ability to project offensive power from a distance, launching multiple attacks throughout the day, remaining mobile while doing so, and made them far more versatile and effective in fighting naval battles than the battleship. Well, there you have it, folks. The Battle of Midway, a decisive battle of World War II, a battle that shows us not only the importance of intelligence, but then using that intelligence in a competent way. The battle shows us technology and how technological advances shaped warfare at that time. And then it comes down to, there's always things like the fog of war and the war gods, if you will. I don't want to say luck, but the fact that the United States was able to sink or destroy 4 of the Japanese carriers in one battle is going to be a blow to the Japanese that they just could not recover from. Here at Professor Liberty, we seek to educate, inspire, and restore. If you like this podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give me a 5-star rating. You would help me even more if you wrote a written review. That gets my podcast more traffic. If you like stuff you hear, you can go to teacherspayteachers.com. Part of this podcast is going to be turned into an assignment on Midway. So if you like those things, go to teacherspayteachers.com. Check out my activities, my worksheets, my projects, anything, especially for homeschoolers. If you like that stuff, if you like what you hear, go check it out, and you can support me financially that way. Until next time, go throughout the land and proclaim liberty.